Well, welcome everybody to our webinar today. This is our, Graham, what is this? Our fifth joint SmartCube CASME webinar?
Yes.
Like that. Today's topic is an interesting one. It's uncovering the hidden opportunities in indirect procurement. We have a fantastic panel, and I think we've got a great conversation that we're going to have today. But before we dive in, let me just maybe set a little bit of context for the conversation. Indirect procurement is an area, I mean, it's had a long history, and it's an area that's been looked at for decades at this point. But interestingly enough, it's still an area that sometimes tends to get overlooked. I think in many organizations, which is interesting because it's a material spend area. It impacts literally every single company in the world. There's no company that's not affected or that has to think about indirect procurement. And it's a fundamental enabling function. So there's real value to be had. And particularly in today's day and age, we need to keep a strong lens on all opportunity areas, and indirect procurement is no exception, particularly when you consider how organizations have grown, how complex they've become, how the supply market has evolved, and how intense competition is getting across the board. And given all of that, it's all the more relevant and all the more timely to have this conversation about indirect procurement and how we think about it, how we look at it, how it's being impacted by various factors, which again, we're going to get into today, and how we should tackle it as we go forward and where is it headed. So to help us in this conversation and to bring their insights in, we've put together an esteemed panel. And I'm going to let the gentlemen introduce themselves as we dive in. But we have, in addition to myself, three other gentlemen on the call. I'll start off with Klaids. Klaids, I hope I'm going to get your name right. Klaids Lafon de Ribeyolles, ostensibly out of Europe, but not right now. He's actually in India, Bangalore, India. Klaids, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Omer. So I'm Clyde, and I joined Schneider 2 years ago. And as Omer was saying, I'm based usually in France. And over the last 8 years of my career, I've been basically transforming indirect procurement. And I started at Rolls-Royce, where we changed the organization, we changed the system and processes, then move on to Amazon in operations in Europe before joining Schneider. So that's a brief overview of my career in indirect. And before that, I did a lot of direct and corporate stuff in procurement. And as you said, Omer, indirect most of the time is the poor child of the procurement, the ones that are looked around. If you go, and we'll talk that later on, many years, probably the graveyard for people where you didn't know where to put them, you were putting them in indirect procurement. We changed a lot since then. Just to reemphasize the importance also of indirect and proper management, at Schneider, as an example, a third of our external spend is in indirect procurement. So a third of everything of what the company is spending is indirect. And it covers all non-productive materials. So really everything the company buys goes to proper governance through the indirect team. A quick word on Schneider before I hand over to Mike. So really Schneider's purpose is to empower all to make the most of our energy and resources, bridging progress and sustainability for all. And Schneider is the leader in electrification, digitization, and sustainability. And over the last few years, we've been really recognized in all these fields, and in particular in sustainability, where we've won all sorts of pricing. I'm not going to name them, otherwise we'll need the entire hour. So sustainability is ingrained in our DNA and is not a buzzword on the wall. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah. Mike Green, Newell Brands.
Yep. Mike Green from Newell Brands. Pleasure to be here. Thank you to Graham, Omer, to SmartCube, to CASME for having me. Really, really excited to be talking to you guys. I'm excited to learn from Klaids because he's got a fantastic background and I think is going to have some good insight. I'm going to try to hold my own. But I'm Director of Indirect Sourcing here at Newell Brands. Been with our company for approaching 7 years now. Newell Brands is a company many people might not have heard of. You've heard of just about all of our over 200 brands. We're in the consumer goods world. And I can almost promise you you have one of our brands in your home. We have quite a few for you. Indirect for our company is a $1.2 billion spend as an overall organization. My team is responsible for a little more than half of it within Newell, but I do have some great counterparts working alongside with me. So I'm talking to you here from our headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. And again, happy to be here.
You're on mute, Omer.
A classic
error.
Oh my goodness. Somebody had to do it. So I was going to say, we're literally coming at you from all corners of the world. So India, from Atlanta, Georgia, and over in the UK, Graham Crawshaw.
Hello, it's great to be here today. So I'm Graham Crawshaw, the Procurement Content Director at CASME. So I'll be here adding in some of the observations that have come from the entire CASME membership. So looking forward to the session.
Fantastic. And I'm Omer Abdullah. I'm one of the co-founders of the Smart Cube. I take care of our procurement business globally, based out of Chicago, where it is a little cooler even than in the UK, about 6.5 Celsius, thereabouts. But that's a great day for Chicago, frankly, at this time of year. So, so all good. All right, so let's dive into the content. So the way we've structured the conversation today, we'll be developing the conversation around 4 key questions. Number 1, how has the indirect procurement model evolved over the last decade? That's the first question we'll tackle. Then we'll talk a little bit about what are the hidden opportunities within indirects and how do we sort of think about that. The third question we'll tackle is an important one, given everything that's going on today around inflation. What's the impact of inflation, and what are the best strategies to mitigate its impact? How should you think about that? And more importantly, how should you tackle that? And then we'll close out the conversation with question 4, which is, what does the future hold for indirect procurement? So that's the structure of the conversation we'll have. I will facilitate the conversation. I think it's going to be a super interesting discussion. Before we launch into the first question, though, I believe, Graham, we have a poll.
We have a poll, yes. We always like to take the opportunity to get some very up-to-date benchmarking, i.e. now. And so to get you all interacted, please answer the first question. So which of the following are your biggest area of concern as it relates to indirect procurement at your organization? So please select one out of the following choices. Is it inflation? Is it labor shortages? Is it supplier capacity, supply chain delays, issues with supply chain, or other? So a very simple question, just to get a feel for what are the current concerns that you've got at the moment. So we're going to give you time just to respond. It's great. We've got over 425 people on the call at the moment. Also, whilst you're just answering that, a quick reminder, we've got the Q&A box that is on part of Zoom. If you've got a question for any of us, please put it in there. I can't promise we'll get it, and I can't even promise we can give you an answer, but we'll give it a go as time permits at the end. So that's the plan. I can see the numbers just coming up. I'm just going to give it 5 more seconds for you to answer and provide that, and then we will share the responses. So 80% of you have responded so far. I know sometimes technology doesn't allow you to complete, but here we go. In the interest of time, let me share the results. So we have got the percentages applicable, because you could only answer one. 43% of you have said inflation is the biggest concern. 22% say supply chain delays and issues, followed by labor shortages at 18%, supplier capacity 12%, and just 5% saying other. Are we surprised about that, Omer? I don't think so. That's my view, but let's see what the others think.
Yeah, I don't think so. Klaids, Mike, what's your take there?
Well, inflation is very topical right now. Everywhere you look, we had an interesting year in 2021, and the recent events in 2022 are just making it even bigger of an issue. So there is no, for the moment, no light inside of the tunnel, but there are ways around it. So I'm not surprised by this. And then the second, of course, the supply chain. That if you have to transport things, that's probably one of your biggest nightmares right now.
Yeah. Mike,
Absolutely.
does that align with your sort of worldview?
Definitely. And I think they're linked. The supply chain and the inflation are definitely feeding each other, to say. So not surprised. It's definitely an issue we're experiencing here at Newell Brands. Inflation is something that we're also all experiencing on a personal level. So it's top of mind on numerous levels for all of us here, no matter where you are in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we were all hoping that 2022 was going to be a year where we come back to normal, whatever that word is. But it's clear there's more uncertainty in store for us. So it's going to be an interesting ride. So
that's what we said about 2021 too.
That's right. At some point, it's got to get back to normal. I don't know. At some point.
Well, the normal is the abnormal now, Omer. So
that's right. I'm going to use this term, the new normal. The new normal. We actually said on our last webinar, Graham and I said we will never use that term again. But I'm sorry, we had to use it again. All right. So let's dive in and let's dive into our conversation with our first question. Maybe and take a step back from the situation of today and talk a little bit about how the indirect procurement model and how indirect procurement within each of your organizations has evolved and changed over the last decade and a half, whatever time frame you think is there. How is the lens on indirect procurement, the value, the focus on indirect procurement changed in that time frame? So, Klaids, maybe I can ask you to kick off.
Sure. If I'm rewinding a little bit, when I started in indirect procurement, it was really seen as the back office of the procurement. So we need to buy some stuff, stakeholder or colleagues within the company. Hey, I'm picking that suppliers, and there is indirect procurement. Please raise my PO, and please do it quickly because it's urgent. And with the technology developing, and with also prior crises, so we had steel crisis, we had a lot of in the direct procurement side things that basically help us being more at the forefront. People starting to realize, oh, if I'm starting to pay attention at that spend in indirect procurement, it might be easier to generate opportunity of saving money than in the direct world. I don't have to go to a customer to validate my product or to recertify my product. So in terms of pocket of opportunity, it started to be really in the lights of the different organizations. And as I said, also the technology has started to help because we have tools now, and I'm not going to name any, but some are starting with a C, other with an A, and you name it. There are plenty of them that are enabling that direct contact between anyone within the company and the indirect procurement team. So we can reach now the entire population through tools, and they can express their needs, and we can solve these needs through catalogs or rapid sourcing and all this stuff at a very fast pace that is compatible with their expectation in terms of business holders. So I say both the opportunity to really save money quickly, and then the opportunity from a technological standpoint has transformed the way indirect procurement has been viewed in company. Later on, because we're going to talk about the future, also the role of a person in the indirect procurement changed drastically from what I was saying, a back office, to a true business partner that will help you building your business strategy, help you looking at alternatives that not only will help you on the purchase side, but on your sales side as well. So that's more than just procurement. That's really what I call the competitive advantage on your buy, but also on your sales, by delivering something that will give you an edge to compare to your competitors.
You know, it's a great point. And actually, there's a number of things you talked about: greater corporate focus, the change in technology, stronger sort of emphasis on the value of indirect procurement. The nuance that you shared, I think, was really interesting. And that is that everybody knows, we've always talked for decades about, a dollar saved in procurement goes directly to the bottom line. And versus, let's say, another dollar of revenue, not all of that goes to the bottom line, obviously, because there's costs involved. But the interesting nuance that you just shared is the fact that from a control point of view, we have no approvals to get on indirect procurement other than internal approvals. We have to do the right thing, of course, within the organization. Whereas on the direct side, there's a clear client impact, which is a whole different ballgame in terms of how you think about it, how you approach it, what the impact is from a reputational point of view, product, et cetera. So I like that lens. It's an interesting lens to put on this aspect of indirect procurement.
Omer, I just want to come back on the reputational risk as well, because indirect has a big role to play in protecting the company. So I will slightly disagree with that statement. There is less risk. I think there is as big of a risk. It's different, but as big of a risk. If you source to a contractor potentially that use child labor or underpay, overpay, in any country, it's not just some country issue. I faced some terrible things in what we call Western economies. Yeah. That's a lens that you need to keep in mind, because you are here to source with the right vendor to protect the reputation of your company. 100%,
great clarification. And then by extension, even from an IT and technology investment, given cybersecurity and how important that is today, 100% that plays in. Mike, how does that align with kind of how you think about the model evolving over the last decade?
I think it's 100% spot on, and I like how Klaids just jumped in here with that clarification, because I think it's the exact same, where there is reputational risk tremendously from our indirect suppliers, and I think recent events are exacerbating some of that, where we are now in indirect trying harder to look at the entire supply chain that we have within our indirect space. Some of our second and tertiary suppliers of our indirect suppliers, right? Where years ago that was not a focus. I remember for years we've been talking about, you really have to look at risk in your indirect supply base. For the longest time, I didn't think that applied to us. You know, if a marketing agency goes out of business that we're dealing with, we'll just go down the street and get another one. Now it's even more important to know who you're doing business with, who they're doing business with, and things of that nature. So I think indirect is really growing in prominence and respect within organizations. I have seen that definitely change within Newell Brands, where indirects, the last step before legal, make sure this contract is ready to go. Yeah. We've done a few bits of due diligence. We're being more proactive. We're looking and meeting with our stakeholders up front to see what's on your horizon. How can we help you achieve your goals, maintain your budget, and manage your suppliers better? We rely quite a bit on our suppliers for numerous ways. So we're really trying to be, it's cliche to say, be more strategic and not tactical. I think indirect is really coming into that world now. Yeah. That you used to think strategic was only on the direct source finished goods side. Indirect is on par with that.
Yeah, sure. It's a good point, and particularly on this whole aspect of multi-tier transparency. You're right. Normally when that issue is raised, you automatically think, oh, directs, that's where it applies. But that's absolutely right. It applies just as much on many of the indirect sides as well, in terms of how we think about it. Graham, what have you been seeing in terms of the CASME member base, and how do they think about this issue or the evolution?
I think over the last sort of 10 years, we have seen such significant change. I think business has got more complex, so people have fed that back to us. And so procurement's sort of been reacting to that, specifically when it comes to indirect procurement. So for my example, I'm going to talk about or call upon supply relationship management, because I think I've got so much evidence that when there has been a crisis, whether it has been the pandemic, whether it's any of the other issues that we've been facing, then the close working with suppliers has been what's evolved over time. It can't be done immediately because you've got to have that trust in place. But I think procurement collectively working together has realized that actually SRM programs are a massive step forward. And so suppliers are also tuned into that. And as they assess whether they want to work with you, if the spend is significant, if the justification is in place, then actually, yeah, SRM definitely features part of that. And I think the other one that I would say is seen a significant growth in the use of centers of excellence. Now, we could spend an hour talking about what they look like, how they work, but the principle of having that internal support function enabling the rest of procurement to actually get its work done. I see those as the fundamental changes as we go forward and look at how procurement really does add even more value to the business.
Yeah, I think both of those points make a lot of sense, and particularly the first one where what you're alluding to is customer of choice, right?
Yes,
the customer of choice applies as much, and it applies in every single category. It applies as much in indirects as it applies from a directs perspective. So
and at times we've almost been arrogant. Yeah. We've been arrogant that, yeah, we're all from companies that spend a lot of money, therefore the supplier will want to work with us. Yeah. But equally, if you pay late, if you don't share your objectives, if you don't actually work with those suppliers, then you're not going to be that customer of choice.
Yeah.
So I think knocking down the arrogance and generally working closer is what more better procurement functions have been doing in recent years. And that really has paid off at a time of crisis.
Yeah, exactly. I think the rubber met the road, so to speak, in the last couple of years as the pandemic hit, and we sort of learned where the real relationships were and where they were developing. So I think that makes sense. As we sort of look at it, there's a greater evolution of a bigger lens on indirect procurement and the impact and value to tackle this point around risk that it has from an organization perspective. There's a evolving, I'll call it a supply market from a technology perspective and other aspects, and that'll help drive value creation through indirects. Let's go to our next question, which is, given all of that, I would suspect a lot of organizations have gone through, the foundational strategic sourcing programs, and they've looked at, unit cost reduction and price reduction and some of those sort of aspects. And, let's just say the low-hanging fruit, right? Fundamentals like supplier consolidation, all those things, we've sort of tackled those things. What would you say are some of the hidden opportunities within indirects, the things that people think a little less about, but should be thinking more about? And Mike, maybe you can kick us off on this question.
I think one of the biggest areas of value is not in the productivity, the savings we're achieving, but really indirect's opportunity to be the pollinator within the company of sharing best practices, ideas from other functions with other functions that might not be talking to each other. As our role touches just about every function and business unit here within Newell, quite often we're talking to more people than our stakeholders are and can share some insights, especially as it relates to common platforms that we're using. We talked about technology being one of the biggest changes over the last 10 years. Technology is at the heart of just about everything that we do, no matter what we're doing for the company. So I think being able to share best practices going on within our company is a hidden opportunity for us to be adding value and building a good reputation inside our organization.
Makes sense. Klaids, would you?
No, I will echo that. We have a unique view of many data shared between different entities, legal entities, different functions, so we can guide that. The other principle I've been always looking at is, like Mike was saying, don't only look at the price of the component you buy, but look at the impact on the cost of the company. Let me give you a very good example, that a simple example, but I think it's speaking well. In one of the companies I was working for, we were buying cutting tools. So there are tools that you use to cut metals. And there are different sorts of tools. Some are inexpensive, some are expensive. And working with our manufacturing engineering team, we've decided to buy more expensive tool. So it on my normal KPI. But the beauty of it, it was cutting twice as fast as the old one. So in terms of impact at the company P&L and profit was bigger, and it was lasting twice. Yes, it was 40% more expensive, but the total cost of ownership and the total cost for the company and benefit were way beyond what we were paying more. And I think that's when we talked about hidden opportunity, it's looking at the impact you may have on other part of the company. And yes, you may take a hit, but you may save hundreds or thousands on every dollar that you're going to pay more. And I think that's where sometimes we have a tendency in procurement that's just looking, oh no, that's going to hit my KPI. But when you look at the board scheme and when you are moving to that business partner role I was mentioning earlier, that's really changing the dynamic. And that's where also, because you do that, you are getting much more receptive people in front of you when you are suggesting change.
Yeah.
So definitely based to share, but also looking beyond what we are just buying and how we can improve the competitiveness of the company is where really the hidden gems of indirect procurement are. And I can name other example, but that one was very, very nice because it's simple and you can see the effect immediately.
So Clyde, just maybe if we can dig a little deeper on that, how do you sell something like that within the organization? I mean, you know, there's a tendency, like you said, we look at face value. Oh, my metrics are going to get hit, right? It doesn't make sense. And it sort of relates a little bit to what Mike was saying around, you know, communications and being the pollinator across the board. How do you sell that internally?
Well, once you have the case, it's speaking for itself. You have the finance boys and girls on your side, and then they are spreading the news. And at the end of the day, don't forget that we are all working for the company. So irrespective of where the pocket of opportunities are going, that's going to all benefit to us. So I think that the sales is in the proof of the pudding is in eating. So you need to demonstrate that it's working. And once you've got a couple of cases, then you start using these cases to others. So I was talking about cutting tool. We did the same thing on metrology. We extend also on transportation, different things we are doing. But by just making that slight, yep, price is important, but the biggest bang for the buck will mostly happen somewhere else. And in particular time, like when we are talking about inflation, this is this type of initiative that will create really a difference for your company and for your own department, and will help riding that inflation wave. Maybe not 100%, but at least you'll contribute to a major impact.
Yeah, that makes sense. So clearly a fact-based, data-driven business case, broader communication, bringing the right stakeholders into play. I like how you talked about finance. That's actually a point I want to come back to, because I would expect, and I'm sure you'll agree, that finance is a key stakeholder as you're driving value across the enterprise. Let's come back. Yeah, sorry.
Crime. They are all buddies in crime.
Yeah. So let's come back to that point in finance in a second. Graham, what are you hearing from across the CASME community in terms of as you think about this issue of hidden opportunities?
Yeah, I think first of all, there is no. It's not rocket science what we do in procurement. I think what we do is about doing things well. I would say that the whole emphasis around value beyond savings, again, nothing particularly new, but more companies are really believing it now. And actually, when you do focus your attention, you get the stakeholders on board by talking about values, whether it is achievements through sustainability or through risk, you're actually selling procurement and what you do so they understand it better. And so because those relationships are stronger, you can get more done. So I don't think, I'm often asked, what is that golden nugget or that silver, whatever phrase you want to use, that's the answer. The perception is everyone else is doing things better, which I think is false. And it's interesting to be able to sort of see that. But I think it is that getting the stakeholders, getting those conversations so that you really can make a difference. And when we do look at what that value is beyond savings, wow, the list continues to grow. And it demonstrates, as you said, Mike, you're involved with every aspect of the business. And so you've got to almost use that to your advantage.
Yeah,
I totally agree, because really if all we're focused is savings, that's not a sustainable operation year over year over year. And we've tried hard to really look at how we can contribute in more than just savings. Two things jump out at me is our latest initiative has been on working capital improvements to the company, which almost have as much of an impact as savings do. We've had some acquisitions. We were debt heavy. It was a major focus and is now on par with our savings initiatives, and it delivers as much impact. You know, the other thing where we delivered tremendous impact and value at the outset of the pandemic, our indirect teams were working day and night just to help keep our factories open. You know, I think a lot of folks were on this call were involved in finding masks and finding gloves and finding all these kind of things that you thought were not important until you couldn't get a hold of them. I know my colleagues were working day and night and literally helped keep our factories open. Without that, we would not have been operating similar from contingent workforces and things like that we've had. So, you know, I think our value, we weren't achieving savings there. There was, you know, scarcity, inflation. It didn't matter. You know, we were delivering value by just allowing us to operate.
Yeah. Talk about strategic categories that we didn't think were strategic categories a few months prior to that, right? In late 2019.
And I like what Mike said, not only it helped keeping our factory open and running, but it saves life. And I think that's something we can really be proud of as well. It's not that, so talking about value, that's way beyond keeping factory. That's also making sure that the well-being of our communities in our companies, but also around. So that was it was tough, but at least you could see the direct impact you could have.
100%. So I have sort of a related point on this before we go to question number 3. And that is the foundation to be able to drive value and drive savings in any category, direct or indirect, has to start with the right data, the right insight and transparency into what you're spending, where you're spending, how you're spending, and all of those facets that go into it. I guess my question is maybe tying the first and second questions that we just talked about together, which is, have you seen, I'm trying to think of how best to ask this. Have you seen the lens that has been put on data, in particular around indirects data? I think with directs, people tend to pay a little bit more attention to it, given the magnitude and the cost. But on indirects, have you found that the lens on indirects data and the transparency and visibility of that spend and how it's made up has increased materially over the last decade or so as you've been working in that space? And how important has all of that been to the success that you've achieved within the indirect space in your companies? Klaids or Mike, either of you can pick this up.
Well, I'll jump in here. I mean, I think the availability and the abundance of data has grown exponentially, right? And so while data is absolutely more important because it's more available and you can look at it, it also brings with it, you know, no matter what data set there is, somebody's going to question it. So I think understanding where the data is coming from and how you can use it is more important than just obtaining it and looking at it, right? And understanding how your stakeholders are trying to achieve their goals, you know, and what the data is suggesting about things we shouldn't be doing or things we should start doing. Data is definitely paramount, but the business acumen of understanding all of what goes on in your company, how the data is driven, how your suppliers are feeding into that data, I think is very critical.
Yeah, I will echo what Mike just said. I think the amount of data is impressive. The cleanliness of data sometimes is less so impressive. So having a good understanding of what are your data sources and how you're going to use it is critical. But once it's a good, well-managed process, so you know your KPIs, you know, that's also helping you, back to the point earlier, supporting some very data-based discussion with your stakeholder, and you can show them the impact of some of their decision and what you could do for them. The thing I'd like also to emphasize on the data is not only on spend data and supplier data. it's also about your own data, how much time you take to answer a stakeholder request. So that's very important that you keep measuring that as well to show that you are improving and that you are really responding fast to the request. So don't focus only on spend and savings, but how much time are you spending on answering any requests that are coming your way? And that's critical, because if I'm going home, I can order in 2 clicks on some platforms, and the response time is immediate. And people, that's the benchmark, like it or not, that's the benchmark that our colleagues within our company are using.
Yeah. And
improving that response time is also critical. So data, yes, but many more than just the spend and the savings and so on and so forth.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And you know, we sort of, I think that is the, there's a lot of talk about that right now, right? The consumerization, bringing B2C thinking into the procurement world. But you're right. If I can, you know, buy something with 1 click or 2 clicks here, why can't I do that at work? And really, it should be. And I think we're going to see a whole lot more of that thinking. I think we're seeing a lot of that today, but we're going to see even more of that as we go forward. So I think that's a great point. And then I do want to go to question 3 because I'm mindful of our time. The only point I tie back is, Klaids, what you raised earlier around finance. And I think, you know, to Mike, what you said around, you know, people are going to dispute the data. They're going to question what you've got. So getting the right data, setting the right baseline and basis to build off of is important. And finance, I would think, is a strategic partner in that process to make sure that you've got the right baseline to work off of. So, all right, now let's get into something that's pretty meaty and very, very topical, which is question 3, which is, we've talked about hidden opportunities. We've talked about the evolution of the function, and in particular, indirect procurement area. What is the impact of inflation, and what do you see as the best strategies to mitigate that impact? So I think we're in an environment now where, you know, a few months ago, we were talking about inflation being transitory. It feels a little less transitory right now, particularly with what's going on over in Europe as well. But how have you sort of grappled with that in your respective organizations? And what are some of the strategies to mitigate that impact? And Graham, maybe if you can maybe provide the context from a CASME membership perspective, and what are folks talking about across the CASME community on the topic of inflation?
Clearly is a quite a major challenge for everyone. And I think because it is at such a height, so 30-year high, I think at the moment, according to the press, you've actually got procurement professionals that have never really needed to manage inflation. So they're struggling to use the tools or to work out, because if you just refuse increases from suppliers, they're going to decline to want to supply. We're almost back to that conversation we had at the start here. So it has got to be agreement, but you've got to almost get that detail to really understand what part of your price is being impacted by either labor or specific commodities that is having an impact. And it's on those that you need to then focus down and really get to the detail. So I would say it's all about the detail, is understanding what you're buying, what's broken down to be able to challenge, so that then the supplier knows that they can't take advantage of the situation. And then you can continue your negotiation. And I think before I shut up, my final point on this is, remember, negotiation is a win-win. If it's only in favor of either your company or the supplier, and the other is unhappy with the outcome, that's not a successful negotiation.
Yeah. And it ties right back to that whole customer of choice conversation that we had earlier as well, right? It all balances out in the end. And you're right, it's an interesting point. There's a whole generation in the workforce today that has never seen material inflation. They have no idea what that looks like. So I think these are interesting times indeed. Klaids, your thoughts?
Well, Graham is spot on. Understand the data first. Not everybody is seeing, or not everything is seeing the same level of information of inflation. Sorry. So getting a good grasp on the cost structure of what you buy is very important to have a mindful and helpful conversation. The other point I'd like to add is back to what I was saying. Don't try to fight something that you can't control. Oil, well, that's a dead battle. Don't spend your time, but spend time on what can you control. So if I'm staying on oil, you will not be able to influence yourself the price of the barrel, or maybe you have some rich family member somewhere, but you can influence the way you are consuming oil. I mean, in the logistics side, try to optimize your routes, ship less air. You'll be amazed when in shipments, in containers or trucks, the amount of emptiness or air that we are shipping. So optimizing your packaging, optimizing how much you can put in a container is paramount, because then, yes, you'll still pay higher price for the truck, but when you're going to go back to the amount shipped, kilos or products, you're going to maybe not decrease, you're going to decrease it. What I mean, maybe not come back to the original pricing or less, but you're going to have a material impact. So focus on what you can control. And the beauty of indirect procurement sometimes is you can change a little bit the technical spec, as we were saying, without having to go to a customer to validate. So ship less air, ship or optimize route, or you can influence demand, right? We are a typical example that we are seeing sometimes leasing computers 3 years, and then the computer's price is up, extend the lease for 1 additional year. And so you can influence the demand, you can influence the length that will kind of reduce this type of inflationary impact. But back to the first thing is know your cost structure of your product or services.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Knowing the cost structure, that's what I had paramount on my list as well. So totally agree there. And know what your vendors, your suppliers can control is another interesting, take on Clyde's statement. If you're going to take inflation, if you have to take a price increase, what can they offer in return? So I'm going to go back to working capital. It's huge on our side. Can we extend payment terms with you? Can we change something else? Service levels, things of that nature. So what can I make a win out of this, what looks like a losing situation at the beginning? That's one way that we are finding some sliver of opportunity in this to mitigate the inflation. I think you have the other.
Mike, if I'm, oh, sorry, go ahead. No, if I may rebound, that's a very valid point. On top of what you just said is listen to your vendors. Sometimes they're going to come not only with suggestions to how to mitigate, but great ideas on what you could change that will have mitigation, being on payment terms or better utilization of them. So listen to them. If you are truly, what Graham was saying in the next, healthy relationship, SRM, they have as much stake as you in that story. Yeah. So listen to them.
Yeah, I think it's a good opportunity to address maybe some process and structural problems. For example, in the services side of indirect, maybe there's aspects there's rework and manual workarounds that the vendor is having to do because of internal inefficiencies. Might be a good way to address that, so as to then manage the demand and hence the total cost of what's getting done. So I think that's practically a valid point. And Mike, I like that point. In sales, we talk about negotiations and not concessions, right? So in the sense that, okay, I will concede something. Concession means I'm going to give you something and get nothing back. But a negotiation means it's a two-way discussion. And back to Graham's point, it's a win-win solution. We're both getting it. But Mike, I think you had another point you wanted to add there, right?
To mitigate, the traditional things that we're also doing is relying on, capped increases in renegotiation years, trying to limit inflation and forward buying, as well as expanding the specs. We've found some good success, not just looking at, all right, here's the specs that we have for right now, challenging them. Laptops are a great example. Did we really need all of these specs on when there's the chip shortage? We qualified new chip providers, as well as changed a few things that weren't really necessary in today's environment, but we're going into and making our machines harder to come by.
Yeah. Nice to haves versus must haves.
Correct.
In that context.
When you can't have it, then, you know, it doesn't matter. So,
so I have a what I know in the finance world is a controversial question, but I'm not going to ask that yet. Just a point I want to add around that is, I think the cost structure idea is paramount. That's the foundation to understand that. And an interesting thing that you know that we've been seeing as well across our client bases, as you think about cost structure, you know, we're used to this idea that in terms of managing prices and inflation within the direct side, you know, we look at commodity forecasting, right? We forecast out where commodity is going to go. We're going to understand the context to it. And I think an interesting idea to bear in mind is you can do the similar sort of aspect within the indirect side as well, in terms of that cost structure is not only a static view of the constituent elements that make up the cost of a category today, but you can forecast, in other words, do inflation forecasting of those underlying constituent elements, whether it's energy, whether it's labor, whatever it might be, and how that's going to grow over some reasonable time frame. Now, I don't think anybody can forecast 2 years out. We don't even know what's going to happen in 6 months right now, given what's going on in the world.
2 weeks.
Or far less than that, for that matter. But certainly in the next several months, you can have some perspective. So I think that aspect of inflation forecasting and modeling inflation within indirects, I think, is an underlooked area that is as important. And it starts with that cost structure point that all of you have raised. Now, here's my controversial question. Inflation and times of high inflation like this raise the question around those words, cost avoidance. How do you grapple with that in your organization? I know finance folks love the term cost avoidance. I'm joking, of course.
It's an interesting debate, the cost avoidance, and but we are back to the value that you deliver. So I think we have many examples on how we can maybe not talk about cost avoidance, but the value that you are contributing by decreasing the spec or these kind of things. I'm not a big fan of answering that debate. And interestingly, when we talk, we are reporting some of the cost avoidance that we are, but that's not one of our main KPI. So we have a full alignment with finance here. But we also use it to show that the world out there is inflationary in that case, and that we are doing our best to mitigate.
Yeah. So
but we are not. That's not a hard KPI in our world, and both finance and procurement are aligned in this.
Yeah. I agree. It's the same here at Newell. I try to avoid the question, especially when, you know, I have new folks join the organization. They came from a company where you could track that, and it was a KPI they were trying to hit along with savings. And unfortunately, we don't have that view here. It's too easy to lose credibility, I think, because some people can game it, and that's the dangerous part I see about using cost avoidance. So I think it's important to be aware of. It's important to circulate internally what's happening and what the prices and the costs look like, so that, one, you're not only choosing the cheapest supplier, the cheapest option. You know, there are others out there. We went with this supplier for the value that they're delivering, but just focusing on cost avoidance is dangerous, and you got to use it in the right way.
I asked that question intentionally. I know there's no right answer. I know it's a controversial topic, and I agree. It can't be used as an excuse, but there's no question it's a real factor today to grapple with in this environment. So I know we've got 10 minutes left, and Graham, as usual, we're going to have very little time for Q&A. But let's jump to, actually, before we jump to the last question, I think we have one final poll.
We certainly do. Yes, absolutely. So the second poll, and it's about continuing this theme about the greatest value that procurement can bring to the organization. So which of the following procurement activities adds the greatest value to your organization? And you can select 3. And we really want you to just give some thought to which really is the best value that your function delivers. Is it risk management, sustainability, value creation, supplier relationship management, process optimization, compliance, innovation, market insights, stakeholder engagement, or due diligence activities? So all of those really hot topics that we've been talking about, please select 3 that are most important to your organization. Thanks for all the questions and the comments. I love Peter's comment. The new world for cost avoidance is inflation mitigation. I think that's very, very true. What I will do is in the chat, I'm just going to paste some, formatting's a bit useless, but these are 12 points that CASME members have put forward as to what they are doing to help manage inflation. I hope that's of value. If you can screenshot, cut and paste that out. In the interest of time, I won't talk it through. Which of the following activities adds the greatest value? I can see you're all responding to that. Just give it literally 3 seconds to get the answers in, given that we're under time pressure. We always seem to be under time pressure.
We always do. I take the blame for this. I
think we're as bad as each other, Omar. I think that's. I'm going to end the poll, share the results. These results also will be distributed and shared with everyone, so you can study the detail later. But if I look at what we're faced with here, interesting mix, the balance really close to value creation, supply relationship management and risk management. Then we seem to have stakeholder engagement, sustainability, and then we go down to innovation and market insights. So a bit of a blend. I suggest it probably depends on your maturity, complexity of your organization as to which ones really are the priorities at this precise time. So an interesting mix, not a whole focus just on one area. This makes procurement interesting. I hope that's been of interest to look at.
Yeah, and I'll just add, what I really loved about that is that the #1 item, I appreciate by a hair length, was value creation. Fantastic, fantastic. Because I think as procurement professionals, we have to think broader about the function, not just cost, but about value creation. And that's so many things beyond simply unit cost reduction. All right, let's go to the last question. And I'm going to ask everybody if you can give kind of a 1-minute answer on this question. What does the future hold for indirect procurement? Mike, may I ask you to kick off there?
I'm going to start with a sacrilegious statement, and that we're going to see vendor proliferation. I think the cost of doing business with suppliers and vendors is coming way down with technology improving, with suppliers, really fitting in their technology, fitting more and more niche areas, that we might see an area where we're open to doing business with more suppliers in certain areas. And it's easier to kind of, if it all connects, we don't have to put everything under the one roof. I say that it's sacrilegious. We are making efforts to go the opposite direction right now in Newell. So we'll see if that's truly what comes to fruition in the future. But it's using technology more. I think the more acceptable answer is really understanding the supply chain, the visibility within your indirect supply base is also another thing that I see coming, probably less controversially so.
Interesting. I love that first one. I wonder if the role of marketplaces and what they'll play in terms of driving that as well. But Klaids, over to you.
The way I'm driving my organization is really around competitive advantage and certainty. And competitive advantage, what I truly mean is we're going to become real business partner that will not only focus on cost, but look at your business problem and solve it with our supply chain. So that's really enabling the business to deliver quicker to a customer, to open new markets, and so on and so forth. And the certainty is all about the risk we've mentioned. So that can be delivery quality, reputational risk, regulatory risk. You mentioned cybersec. There are all sorts of regulation coming online that you need professional to manage this, because that's not the poor guy, the poor requester in all companies that would be able to understand the magnitude of some of these risks. So that's really focusing on competitive advantage, or call it value, and certainty, and to move from a business partnering. Because back to Mike was saying, and what you guys were saying, with technology, now the action of sourcing, the responsiveness will be there, and the technology are driving toward this marketplace, et cetera. And because we're going to do a good job on understanding our business, all the solution for what people have to buy will be there in the platform. So we'll really shift the role in being business advisor.
Fantastic. I love that point. Graham?
I'm going to keep it really, really short in the interest of time. I don't think there's been a better time to work in procurement. There is so much going on. To me, it's all about those different areas of value. And we've had a whole hour. We've not even mentioned ESG, environmental, social governance, sustainability. That, to me, is the future of really getting stakeholders and the business, investors, everyone on board with those activities. That door's just opening. We'll wait and see what that brings. But to me, that's the future.
Yeah, by the way, I think Clyde's background spoke to ESG quite nicely, though.
It did.
That's your DNA. That's in our DNA, so I'm not mentioning
it. So, I think I'd echo all those points. I think the value creator, the business partner role, I think that's paramount for where the function is going. And I think foundational to that is a better understanding of the business, which means more data, which means more insight, which means more understanding of kind of what's going on. So I think those are all key and relevant themes. And I love the controversial comment, Mike, vendor proliferation. Let's see where that goes. I think we have literally 2 minutes. So Graham, is it possible for maybe take one question?
Yes, I'm going to take the highest ranked one based on everyone. How will the marketplace solutions like Amazon B2B really help with streamlining the long tail spend?
Klaids, Mike, either of you want to? I think that ties into this point around marketplaces, around this consumerization, the B2C aspect, but thoughts?
Yeah, well, that's directly aligned also to Mike's comment. We have at our fingertip a solution, and being Amazon or other marketplaces, that give access to a lot of things we are buying, even though it's more product related for the moment, that's going to come in the service. The only caveat I will put on that is these marketplaces need to do an excellent job and need to be able to show that they are controlling the supplier they are working with, back to very first comment in the tier, and they are not selecting vendors that can eat your reputation. Because at the end of the day, if you are buying and there is something, that's not going to be the marketplace that will be on the front page of the papers. That's going to be your company.
Yeah.
So there are some work here yet to be done.
That's the difference between, the marketplace for more consumable, tactile items and the software value-added reseller, somebody on the IT space that offers quite a few different pieces of software and solutions, but they help control and impact what's being installed, offered, and who they're doing business with.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, we're right on time. I apologize to folks who've asked. There's a number of questions. We haven't been able to get to it, but if you've been to our webinars in the past, it should be no surprise. We never get to all the questions, but that's because the conversation is great. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Klaids, for dialing in from India for this
My pleasure.
Webinar and participating. Mike, thank you very much for dialing in from the East Coast and participating. And Graham, as always, thank you as well for being part of the conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
And thanks to the